Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Countless Vlogcast. I'm your host, Justin Rich. My guest today is Kelvin Pace. He's a sex therapist. He's going to talk to us a little about what he does and give advice, and hopefully you enjoy it, guys. Alrighty. All right, good evening. How are you? Can't hear you. Sorry. Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah, I can't hear you.
All right. Hey, I'm doing pretty well today.
All right, how you doing? So just tell us a little about yourself.
So I'm Kelvin Pace. I'm a licensed professional counselor, supervisor, and I'm an AASECT Certified Sex Therapist. And so, with being a sex therapist, we look at the psychosexual functioning of the clients that come in to us with sexual issues.
Okay, great. So, as a therapist, how has going to therapy helped you?
So for myself, as an African American male, when I was going through grad school, I was the only African American male in grad school, and also in the profession when I worked with community mental health agencies, I was pretty much the only African American male there. So for myself, a lot of things would come up about imposter syndrome, and that's that weird thinking that am I supposed to be here or not? And that really hindered my ability to move forward in a lot of the things that I wanted to do, because for a while I didn't think I was good enough. So I said, hey, I need to take on this form of anxiety, and I went to therapy myself, and that helped me get over those issues.
Great. So, how do you feel you've grown as a therapist since you began from grad school to now?
Oh, there's so many ways to grow. A lot of it is just realizing what you don't know, and taking on each client as just this unique person that's trying to find their way through this world, and giving that holding space for them, so then that way they can do their own growing. At first, I thought it was all about the techniques and the education and all of that stuff that really helped therapy. And so I would really try to sound robotic by the book. But over time, what I've learned is really that human connection that brings us together.
Great. So, in terms of sex therapy, why would you recommend somebody like come to you and like talk about their issues?
Well, a lot of times sex is such a taboo topic when we're in regards to our mental health or just in everything things. In the African American community, we may put it in our music, we may put it in different places, but we don't actually sit down and talk about sexual issues. And it's because we're embarrassed or we're ashamed about talking about it. So when you come to a sex therapist, you're really getting a therapist that is not going to shame you about sex. We're going to normalize it. We're going to come approach sex in a sex positive way. We get enough judgment and everything outside of therapy, and to be able to come into a therapist that's not going to judge you is a huge advantage of coming to a sex therapist, especially if we can just sit down and process some of those issues that we may be embarrassed to talk about.
Okay. Without getting too personal, what are some issues you find in the Black community in terms of sex issues?
So a lot of things really hit us as men as far as sexual issues, and what I mean by that is we don't get a lot of great sex education in our community, and we get this thought pattern that we are supposed to know everything about sex, and we shouldn't talk about if we're having sexual functioning issues, and we should just sweep those under the rug. And this is especially um, um, apparent in the males that I work with. So if there's a erectile dysfunction coming up, and there's no physical issue about it, then sometimes we go in and we're like, okay, we need Viagra or we need all these other things to help us. A lot of times it just has to do with anxiety, our own anxiety about performing in the bedroom. And so when people come and see me, I'll send them over to get physical exams to make sure that there's nothing physically wrong with them. But then we'll start processing a little bit about the anxiety that may be coming up for them that is having an impact on the sexual functioning. And as far as women, we tend to disregard women's pleasure in sex. And so when there's mismatched libidos, or women have been vilified for having a healthy libido. And so I really try to say, hey, this is normal, this is healthy. Women enjoy sex just as much as men, and there's nothing wrong with you having a high libido, and you shouldn't feel ashamed about it.
Great. So I know it's hard to talk about the issues too, but there's always solutions too. So what are some methods of like coping and solutions to like move forward in terms of like resolving issues and having a better life?
So a lot of one of the main interventions that I use is mindfulness. Mindfulness is a great technique. It really helps us get us back into our bodies. A lot of times I like to use this term time traveling. A lot of times we get stuck in our head and we overthink the future, or we overthink the past. And this has us in this weird place where we're stuck in our head. So I really like for people to use their senses to get back into their bodies and learn how to be present. Because when we overthink the future and the past, then we're not really being grounded in this moment. So I use that to help treat the anxiety that may come up for my men, and also the anxiety that come up for my women that I see.
Okay, great. So this may not be expertise of yours or a particular topic, but in terms of race, do people come to you talk about that too? And what are some ways, if not, what are some ways people could help like cope with that too in their daily lives?
Could you ask the question again? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, in terms of like racism, like facing racism, do you deal with that with the clients? And if not, are there ways you could help people out or like give them some advice on how to deal with that?
Yeah. So as far as race issues that come up, especially among us in the African American community, I really try to help us get grounded and to help us embrace who we are. With the whole George Floyd incident and things like beyond, I've gotten a lot of clients that are stressed, that feel desperate and not connected with the community around them because of the issues. And we're losing friends, we're losing colleagues because of all that's going on. And I really try to teach my clients to get grounded and to lean onto themselves, and then really to connect with people that empower them in our community.
Okay. So in terms of like communication between partners too, what are some problems you find and solutions for that too? Because I know a lot of people like you say in the Black community sweeps under the rug too. So what are some like issues or like some ways we could fix like communication between two people? I think communication is the biggest key to moving forward. So if you could talk on that a little bit.
Oh wow, yeah, this is one of my hallmarks that I work on in couples therapy or even individual therapy. A lot of times we like to qualify our thoughts with the statement, I feel. And it'll look like this: I feel that you don't like me. That you don't like me is not a feeling statement. That you don't like me is a thought that we have. And that gets argued. And, if I go to my partner and say, hey, hon, I feel that you don't like me, she'll be like, what do you mean? I cooked your breakfast. I washed your clothes. I did all of that. What do you mean? I wouldn't do that for someone I don't like. And then I'd walk away from that feeling frustrated and not heard. And so what I try to teach my clients to do is to speak their unarguable truth. And their inarguable truth is how they feel. I feel frustrated, or I feel lonely, I feel sad. Those are feeling words instead of thoughts. And it's hard to argue a feeling. If I were to go to you and say, hey, I feel sad, and you said, no, you don't, I'd be like, well, how do you know my internal mechanisms that are going on? So I really try to help clients to take, to really understand the difference between thoughts and feelings, and to accurately label and to communicate their feelings in order to get them.
So to add to this like stress of like sex issues is also racism and also coronavirus now. So for
Yeah.
people out there that want to receive therapy in the virtual age, though, what are some resources? Though I know there's I've talked to other therapists about telemarketing too. But if you could talk about other resources too for the virtual age.
So there are a lot of resources for therapy to get out there. I mean, there's these. Um, there are online companies that like Better Health or something. I can't recall the name that does teletherapy, but also you can reach out to your local community mental health services that are taking clients that are using teletherapy. You also can reach out to your local universities or colleges that have a master's or uh, post grad program for therapy, because those students that are getting trained, they need to also they need to practice. And so that's a great low cost way to get into therapy if you don't have a lot of resources. You just give them a call and see if they're offering that. Another one is to find a therapist that may have, if you're looking for low cost therapy or something that's not so straining on the pocket, because of COVID-19 kind of took a hit on all of our pockets. So finding a therapist that either has a um, a sliding scale fee, which is low cost therapy, or that has an intern like I do myself. And my intern, she sees all of her clients for free because she can't charge for them, and she's still in supervision with myself.
So how has the industry changed in the last 3 years or so?
Um, it's changing because I think um, I really have to give it up to the younger generation in the African American community. They are really normalizing therapy in the African American community, and that's huge. Some of my generation, in the 40s, we're still a little adverse to trying to go into therapy, but I think that's been a huge change that the young people are doing. They're great. They're really influencing therapy. As far as with COVID-19, the largest change that I've seen is therapy's moving to online. It's a lot of people are saying this is their preferred method. They don't have to drive to an office. They can come in and just sit at their computers and talk with a therapist virtually. And I think that with COVID-19, I think it's really shaped the way that therapy is going to be delivered in the future.
So yeah, so that's, I guess a good topic to speak on too, because a lot of people it's tough because they're used to in-person interactions and all that too. So if
Mm-hmm.
you give somebody like words of encouragement to why virtual therapy could help, even if they're not seeing the person, even if they're not physical, like seeing them in person though too.
Mm-hmm. So teletherapy helps in a few ways. It has its pros and cons. The pro is of course internet connection, but hopefully that'll develop over time, and people may not always have access to visual therapy, to a camera or video therapy all the time. And so those are a couple of the cons. And then also another con may be someone not being able to get into a very private space where they can discuss some of these things. The pros, though, of video therapy is that it's mobile. We can do therapy pretty much anywhere you can find a quiet space to be in. As far as face to face therapy, right now, the way the world is with face to face therapy, especially in my office and the mandates here in Alaska, is I would have to wear a mask in order to do face-to-face therapy, and we lose so much richness from the micro expressions that may be going on in therapy. And so we miss those with having to wear a mask. And I wouldn't want to have to breach my client's confidentiality as well if we're doing face to face, because if I ended up with COVID or my client came in with COVID-19, then I would have to report that. And having to report that, and now that they're tracking people, that pulls away from a lot of my clients' privacy and anonymity. Where on virtual therapy, we reduce the chances of having have contracting COVID-19, so I wouldn't have to violate any privacy.
Great. So going to therapy is one thing, but and going there and being there and talking to like you, for example. But after, what are some methods that people can use to carry that feeling of a therapy after them? Like say they're not able to make it, or after they're like still like struggling afterwards, and they're like by themselves.
Yeah, when you're working with a capable and experienced therapy, a lot of people think that therapy doesn't have a lot of structure. It's just a free for all. But usually, when you see the structure of therapy, you'll see a check in, we'll process a lot of things in the middle. But then therapists really try to go into um, preparing the client for the end of session. And that's either through summary or using coping skills to bring the clients down after after we've talked about some intensive things. So, in therapy, I think, is only 3% of the work that happens when we choose to go to therapy. When we're choosing to go to therapy, 97% of the work is going to have to happen after. And that's whether you're going to do the homework or you're going to use the coping skills that are taught. Those things happen outside of therapy. And it's really empowering to know that you can come to therapy, get a skill, process some stuff, and then when things happen in our lives, we can lean on those coping skills to help us. And so we know intrinsically that we've got this. I like for my client, I like to tell my clients is my goal is to get you out of therapy. So that way you can manage some of this stuff on there.
Okay, great. So another topic, since you're a sex therapist, is divorce. I know you hear that probably a lot too, but ways is like there's always ways around it too. If you could recommend something for somebody out there like struggling in a relationship too, or thinking about like a marriage, something like that too, to like keep them to help their relationship get better.
So my philosophy of marital therapy or couples therapy, I'm not a pro-marriage couples therapist, and that means that I'm not going to try to save the marriage by all means necessary. I know that there's a lot of therapists out there that do, but that's not where I focus at. Because I firmly believe that we bring our own happiness to our relationships to help them to grow. When we start to depend on our marriages to make us happy, then we're setting ourselves up for failure. And also, if we're asking our partners to be the sole person to make us happy when we don't take responsibility in our own happiness, I think that's an unfair ask. So when I approach couples therapy, what I tell my clients is that one, they may, through the ways of communicating their unarguable truth, is that they may come to the point and say, hey, this marriage may not be the right way for right thing for me, but I know how to communicate to my partner where we can at least have a friendship or be civil after if we're moving to divorce. Some of my clients say, hey, nope, we're sticking together, and because they've learned how to communicate accurately to get accurately their feelings. And so it really comes out to not judging people whether they're going to get a divorce or not, because some people realize that maybe the marriage wasn't the right thing in the first place.
Great. So we talked about a little earlier, you have interns and all that, and you get young people starting out too. So any advice out there for young people out there in college thinking about going to therapy and those out there just beginning their practice?
So as far as people just starting out, I would say get as much experience as you can. My route, I went to work with a community mental health services center, and with that community mental health services center, I got to see a plethora of different mental health issues that really geared me up for my private practice. And then once I went into private practice, if you're setting up and starting a private practice, one of the main things is finding a niche, finding something that impassions you as a therapist, and that keeps you going. Why did you get into this work? And once you find that niche, become a master of that niche. Start talking to people in the community about the things that you do. Come on shows like this. Talk about what you love about it. Some people are trauma therapists. Some people are sex therapists. And so like myself, being a sex therapist. I go out and I talk to different people in the community about being a sex therapist, and then people see me as the expert on that field. So find something that motivates you, develop your niche, become an expert in that niche, and then get out and talk about it.
That's great. That's great. So, can you talk a little about the studying part for students, though? Because I know you went to grad school too, but you would talk about the humanistic side of it too, not to like the balance between like humanism and like the study part of it, because that's both are important.
Yeah, they are important. I think the school is excellent. Getting that studying done and remember really digging in because in undergrad there was a lot of rote memorization. You have to pass the test and things like this. In grad school, you're really looking at developing who you are as a therapist while understanding that you are a practitioner, a master's level or a doctorate level practitioner, and you have to be able to back up what you're saying with science and research, but at the same time, problem solving and learning to connect is very important. And so I went to the University of Alaska Anchorage, and they really did a good job in helping me understand of how I apply the information. It's more about the application in grad school. And then that humanist piece is continuously developed throughout your career. Grad school is just the tip of the iceberg of what you learn. Continuing education and therapy, doing therapy over and over again, learning, taking notes, understanding yourself as a therapist is very important for your development.
That's great. So let's talk about an issue that's like been around the community for like the last few months in the conversation, like policing and mental health. If you could talk about it from the African American male perspective and the therapist perspective, that'd be great too.
Policing and mental health, I think I can say that just from my perspective up here in Anchorage, Alaska, is that there the police are trained with some form of how to come in and de-escalate mental health crisis. I think that's what the police up here do a really good job about. And they also, from my experience, have done a good job with working with a therapist to help de-escalate things as well. If I was at a community mental health center and I had to call the police, they really lean on the therapist to make sure that the issue goes smoothly. Um, as general as an African American male, I think that policing and mental health um, should go somewhat hand in hand. I don't know if I'm 100% on board with having therapists go out on calls to do that piece, but I do believe that having some licensed therapists on board at the police, connected to the police department, and having them as consultants or people that they can lean on to when police do go out for a call, I think that's very important.
Okay, so I've been asking this question for the last couple of shows. What is the new normal? Do you believe, from your perspective?
The new normal, I think, until we get a vaccine, I think masks are the new normal. But I also, as Americans, as a community, I think the new normal is having those hard talks. I think that we can no longer, especially with the information age that we're in, where you can just Google anything and see it within zero point 0.2 seconds. I think the new normal is going to lean on people. Is willful ignorance won't be the standard anymore. It's going to force people to do their homework, to do some self introspection, to really have those hard conversations about race, about racism, sexism, um, homophobia, and genderism. I think it's going to have a huge impact on that. No longer can we just say, "Hey, I didn't know," because we have the tools at our disposal to that.
That's great. So can you speak a little bit on like virginity and like people that come to you that are like not ready for sex though too, but like advice you give them?
Yeah, I just meet the clients if they approach me and they're pretty rigid. There has to be some flexibility because they showed up to my office in the first place. And so I just sit down and try to help normalize that piece and normalize some of the anxieties and fears about change. People have to be ready for change, and that first step of making that phone call or reaching out to me on the internet is that first step for change. And so if they're not ready to move, I just meet them where they're at, and then just gently help them get to the place of where they think they should be at. I do treatment plans, and I set up goals based off of the client's goals and not my goals. They're not paying me to meet my goals. And so what I do is I really help them slowly move to the goals that they set out for therapy.
Okay, great. So part two of that question, in terms of couples, and because two people, different people though, in terms of the sex talk too, like from like talking stage to getting comfortable with sex though, what are some like methods you have for that too, like for people getting comfortable too, because two individuals like, are different though, but they're together basically. So if you could
Yeah.
speak on that a little bit too, like comfort level and timing, because there's no perfect timing for any of this, but if you could speak on that a little bit.
The first thing is my website. They know that I'm a sex therapist, and so they contact me, and and by reaching out to me, they already know that they're getting a sex therapist to talk to in couples therapy. So that's the first piece. And then on my paperwork and forms, I do explicitly ask sexual questions just to get a sexual history. So now we're starting to normalize that process for them. And then in my consent for services, I explicitly say, hey, I will talk about sex during our intake assessments, and but I will also speak in your language to make it safe for you. So I won't come in and I won't use slang for genitalia or anything like that. I use correct scientific names for genitalia to make my clients feel comfortable. And then once they start to feel comfortable about talking about sex, I really try to normalize some of the issues that come up.
So I didn't ask this in the beginning. It's a big question. Who's your audience and clientele in terms of like demographics and age wise?
So most of my clients are between 18 and 44, 45. I do sometimes see some younger clients, but I won't see anyone under the age of 16. And sometimes I see people on the older clients. A majority of my clients are couples, and about 70% of my clients are either part of the LGBTQ community, or they have, um, they're not in normative monogamous relationships. They may be in consensual non-monogamous relationships or exploring that. But then the other portion of of the people that I see may be individuals dealing with anxiety, depression, or trauma. With working with Anchorage Community Mental Health Services, I received a huge, immense, and expansive training in trauma. So I also deal with people who've been sexually assaulted and how to work through that trauma, and then also how they can go on to have healthy sex lives after they've experienced that trauma.
Great. So I appreciate you coming on, talking about your experience, expertise, and sharing with the audience out there. Hope people are more comfortable talking about issues and more as we go forward too. Like you get what you do. Thank you very much for what you do, and thank you for coming on.
All right, thank you for having me.
This has been the Countless Vlogcast with my guest, sex therapist Kelvin Pace. Oh yeah, drop your website too, so people can find you and social media. People can contact you.
Yes, my website is kpacecounseling.net.
Okay, great. Thank you guys for watching. Tune in to Countless Vlogcast on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, guys, and make sure you reach out to Kelvin Pace if you have any questions. Thank you again.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night.
You as well. Take it easy.